San Francisco, my hometown. The sound of San Francisco, the sounds of San Francisco, psychedelic San Francisco. One of my most popular videos was the Psychedelic San Francisco, the bands of the 60s, Psychedelic San Francisco. So this is an extension in a way of that. And what this is, the solo works of artists who were in the psychedelic bands of San Francisco. Now, always an asterisk in my videos, or most of them. My list, my rules. This is just a showcase of individual band members who were in some of the more popular and infamous bands of San Francisco in the 60s that went on to do side projects, some parallel while the band continued, and some after the band dissolved into hippie dust, whatever. And I'll tell my take on it. I'll give my take on these records because all these records I bought at the time of their release. And there was a time, if I liked a band, I tried to be all in and would get the side projects for the most part. There's a few exceptions. And I know there will be some missing, and I'd love you to shout out the ones that I missed, maybe I forgot, or I just don't have. And so, and they're in no particular order. So I do want to start out with Janice Joplin. Now, after Janice Joplin, probably orchestrated by Columbia Records, Cheap Thrills was a huge album. Of course, she made, just 2 albums with Big Brother and Holding Company. Their debut, and then, which was on Mainstream Records, and then they switched, went to Columbia. Clive Davis saw Janice Joplin perform at Monterey, and John Simon produced what became Cheap Trick. He had problems with Big Brother as a backing band. Sloppy, not together, but from my point of view, they were the right band for Janice. This album came out, I did buy it at the time with the, what is this? I got demo Cosmic Blues Again, Mama, Janice Joplin with the Full Tilt Boogie Band. I think only Sam Andrew on guitar from Big Brother was left, and it was a whole new band. And, a little more soulful, a little more Motown, not Motown, but Stax kind of sound-ish, funky band. I'm sure technically better musicians than Big Brother, but it's not always about great musicianship from my point of view. I think a lot of you will agree. This is a good album, but for some reason I thought there was a syncopatic, simpatico, I should say, relationship with Big Brother and Janice Joplin, where it just friggin' worked. And I did see Big Brother and Holding Company with Janice in Golden Gate Park once as a young lad. And of course, then this is the huge album, which I don't think is a perfect album by any stretch. I think this came out right after she died, or as I recall, right? Yeah, it came out soon after she died. And of course, it was a big hit because of the great cover of the Chris Christopherson song, Me and Bobby McGee. This is a good record. Is it a perfect record? Cheap Thrills is a much better record, but this is a wonderful record. These are 2 must-haves in the canon of Janice Joplin. And then there are the Woodstock posthumous album, the double live Janice album that came out. So I'm not showing every album, every solo album by all these artists that I'm showing. Mostly, in most cases, again with an asterisk, I'm showing the first couple albums they made after leaving the group, or the first albums they made during the original time the group existed. Now I'm going to go with, of course, the biggest band out of the Bay Area, out of El Cerrito, California, Creedence Clearwater Revival. And, other members made solo records, but the only 2 I really have are records by John Fogerty. And early on, first he made the Blue Ridge Rangers, which had a lot of covers and traditional songs of Hank Williams and Jimmy Rogers, Mel Tillis. It's a country record, and he plays all the instruments. It's one of a la the first McCartney record where he plays everything, and a tour de force in essence. And this, all my friends like this record. We had a good we enjoyed this record from 1973 on Fantasy Records, and at the demise of Creedence, this was kind of a fun record, but all covers, no originals. Of course, a lot of this music influenced Creedence and John Fogerty as he wrote. And then many years later, and this goes from the MTV years. What year was this? In 1984, I believe. Really? Wow. 84, 85, I think. Anyway, Centerfold. Centerfield. I'm thinking of Playboy magazine. Centerfield. This is a fantastic record, and it's so true to the sound of Creedence that he got sued for sounding too much like Creedence because Saul Zaentz and Fantasy owned it. And of course, with the whole debacle, the money issue, which I don't want to dive into, there's a song on here called Zaentz Can't Dance, but It'll Steal Your Money. And he had to change the printing on this for the second pressing of this. It says Vance can't dance, even though he doesn't change the way he sings it. But I don't think, I could be wrong. But this had The Old Man Down the Road, which was a huge hit for him. And it's a great swampy, a la Creedence. It could have been a Creedence song. And it was a great music video. I just remember the beginning following that long guitar cable outside into the house. Lovely video. And great record. This is a great record. Of course, Centerfield, the baseball song. Really a great album by John Fogerty, Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now we're going to go into probably something a little more obscure. I did a recent video where I showcased a CD box set of the first San Francisco band that became very famous, at least in the States, is the Beau Brummels. And unfortunately, they didn't last long. They didn't maintain the hits they had early on in America, only with Laugh Laugh. And I talked about the great album Bradley's Barn, which is recorded in Nashville at Owen Bradley's recording studio, very country, one of the first country rock albums. But Stoneground was a band that I think they only had 3 records in this formation. And Sal Valentino, one of the original members of the Beau Brummels, it was in this band. He only sings on 5 tracks. He co-wrote, I think, more than half the songs on here. What a great, unique voice. Now, Stoneground was sort of a bluesy R&B hippie band, and they're not totally successful, but they're really interesting. 3 of the members, ironically, in this band would later go on to start the band Pablo Cruz, kind of a yacht rock type band, which had some hits, which I was never really a fan of them. They played for the record store I worked for when we opened a new store in San Rafael, California. They played the opening, so I saw them live, and it wasn't my thing. Corey Lirios, great musicians, but that was his band. Also in this band was a great guitar player named John Blakely, who my friend Coleman, you've heard of Coleman, the Coleman Collection. John and Coleman were roommates for a number of years in San Francisco, but they started out as a trio, then they grew to 10 members, and I did see them once, and they were interesting. In the movie Medicine Ball, I believe, and Dracula 2000, one of those, they were in those 2 movies. Sal Valentino, great voice. Stoneground, co-produced by Sal Valentino from Beau Brummels, and Tom Donahue, the father of FM underground radio. So this is 1972, I believe. I wanted to show that. And this copy actually is from the Coleman Collection. Next, one of my favorite of the true psychedelic bands who probably made the most psychedelic album of the psychedelic era in San Francisco is Country Joe and the Fish with Electric Music for the Mind and Body. And this is, he made a number of wonderful records, Country Joe McDonald, out of Berkeley, California. This is on Fantasy Records. And this is Paradise with an Ocean View. Very topical of the time, very in the environmental movement, the whole Save the Whales, when Japanese harpoonists were killing whales, making soap and things. And this is a really lovely album. He became a big folk singer. Obviously, if you saw Woodstock, his whole I feel like I'm fixing to die, give me an F, give me a U, give me a C, give me a K in Woodstock. What a great voice, great anti-war activist, social aware, had a number of wonderful folk-ish albums, and this one's kind of an interesting, fun record, somewhat dated, but a good folk, beautiful, kind of a wailing sailor song that I believe is at end the record. It's Save the Whales. It's just a lovely record. Country Joe and the Fish. Now, there was a band called the Charlatans, an infamous band that never really made it either, but they were infamous playing the San Francisco ballrooms like the Avalon or the Fillmore, and it played up in the Gold Rush, the Gold Country in California, as a sort of resident artist. And they did put one album on Phillips, which really isn't very good. But in the band was Dan Hicks. Dan Hicks would go on to do Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. I just showed their first two albums, their first out on Epic Records, and produced by Bob Johnson, who worked with Dylan and Leonard Cohen. And this is a fantastic record. They were a little bit of Western swing, jazz, folk music, with a little sense of humor, but beautiful, beautiful records. Canned music on this album is great. Shorty Falls in Love, canned music, and I Scare Myself is a great song that they would recreate. They would move to Blue Thumb Records, and this is the record that I really got into the first time initially with this great Tommy LaPuma. I produced this live record, but this is one of those records that works wonderfully live. This is the one to get out of all their records. Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. Just, really beautiful, folky, Western swing, jazz, but in a great way. And Dan's sense of humor, introduction between songs, comes full force on this record. Incredible record. But from the Charlatans to Dan Hicks and Hot Licks, they had a number of records after this. And then I saw their last two shows. They called it quits after playing 2 nights at Winterland, opening up for the Kinks in about 74, I believe. Another one, and these records came out long after the band. These didn't come out until the late 70s. And this is Roy Loney and the Phantom Movers. And these were 2 records they put out on Solid Smoke Records, a local label. I knew the guys that started this. They owned a used record shop in the mezzanine of the record store that I managed for a while in San Francisco. Roy Loney was a founding member of the Flaming Groovies. He was on their early albums on Epic, their early albums, Teenage Head and Snazarazamazam. I'm paraphrasing. Snazzy records. He was not in the band Flaming Groovies when they regrouped in the 70s, doing sort of a power pop sound on Sire Records. But in the late 70s, he formed the Phantom Movers. He was really into the whole rockabilly retro scene. Big fan of the Kinks, early Kinks, the early 60s bands. Now, I knew Roy because I worked with him for a year and a half at ABC Records in San Francisco, just around the time he was recording these records. This is 1980, and this is 1979. I worked with Roy in 78 and 79. He was a sales rep for ABC Records during that time, and I knew him when I was a young lad. I went in and bought a copy of Tommy the week it came out at a record store called Portals to Music that he worked in 1969, and he told me I need to go see the Who, and I bought a ticket and I saw them my first show at the Fillmore West, and they performed the entire Tommy. So he unfortunately passed in the last couple of years, but Roy Lloyd and the Phantom Movers, great kind of rockabilly, rock and roll band, and a great band he had. I saw them a lot play around San Francisco in the late 70s, early 80s. One of my favorite artists, we talked about the Steve Miller Band. There's no Steve Miller solo records here because it defeats the purpose, as always, Steve Miller. But the first 2 albums, Steve Miller came from Texas and San Francisco, and Boz Scaggs was in the original Steve Miller Band on the first 2 records, Sailor and Children of the Future. I love this record. His only record on Atlantic Records, with a great solos and great musicianship of Duane Allman on Loan Me a Dime. FM stations played that song to death, and it's a fantastic blues. This is very blues country. Does a Jimmy Rogers cover on here, produced by Jan Wenner from Rolling Stone magazine, and it's just a fantastic, lovely record. Love this record to pieces. But then he went to Columbia, and to Columbia's credit, they stuck with him, and his records really didn't sell a lot until later. I'm not going to show Silk Degrees and Slow Dancer. Silk Degrees was the big disco dance, slick with the Procaro brothers that would later form Toto as their backup band. I like that. But their first albums, his band was great with the great Mel Martin, who passed away. I knew Mel too for a number of years. A great sax player. But Ann Band, this is one of my autograph, my Maslov editions. I realized around 1971 too, I have about 25 records I wrote my name on. And I recall, I think I was bringing them to friend's house. But fantastic blues, rock, soul, blue-eyed soul. And this record, the thing about this record, this is a fantastic record. There's a song that got a lot of Bay Area radio play called We Were Only Sweethearts with a great flute solo by Mel Martin. Love this record, but I realized compared to all the records, for some reason, I like to see this remastered. The sound of it is a little muffled now, but I do love this record. And this, let's see, who produced this? This is produced by Glyn Johns. Mixed by Glyn Johns. Glyn Johns, who produced all the first, 4, 5, 6 albums by the Steve Miller Band. Yep, Glyn Johns. Boz Scaggs, love Boz Scaggs. All his records are really good, very blues soul. What a great voice, and a great guitar player. Okay. Well, one of the great San Francisco bands, of course, the psychedelic scene was Quicksilver Messenger Service. Loved them to death, and probably particularly loved the guitar playing. They had dual guitar players like Gary Duncan and John Cipollina, and I love John Cipollina's. He's got this SG sound that he has, was very vibrato. He played, and it was just extremely unique. He died way too young. He was in a band that only put one record out in 1973, and that is Copperhead. And in the Bay Area, this got a lot of airplay, especially the song Roller Derby Star and Kamikaze. And rock and roll band, I would say maybe nothing special on Columbia Records, but it is a good rock and roll record. And of course, with that great guitar playing of John Cipollina, it's really wonderful. So, Copperhead. And I've showed this before. This is going before Quicksilver, around the time of the first album. Dino Valenti was originally in Quicksilver and got busted and went to prison. So he wasn't on the first 3 Quicksilver albums, which I like. When he rejoined the band, they did have actually their first huge hit with Have Another Hit, but this whole reverb-drenched thing happened, and the band became something different. I prefer their first 2 albums, the self-titled album and Happy Trails. Fantastic. He was not on, but he did this great separate folk album with a lot of reverb. This was also produced by Bob Johnson, the same producer from Columbia Studios, worked with Dylan, Leonard Cohen, and it's a beautiful psychedelic folk record, freak folk, if you will. Children of the Sun got played on FM radio in San Francisco, and it's sort of a parallel thing. It came back and, to me, kind of ruined the trajectory that I felt with Quicksilver Messenger Service. But I think it's important. This is an important record, has been reissued, and it's really, if you like freak folk, haunting vocals, but beautiful, beautiful record. Of course, it's hard to show a solo record of an artist that basically the name of the band is Your Name, and this I'm referring to Santana. Santana went on in various incarnations. Some prefer the first 3 records. That's the band, the core band, the first album, self-titled, wonderful record with some great Tito Puente and that fusion of Latin rock, Latin soul music, just wonderful instrumentals as well as various vocals, and Michael Shreve on drums, and a couple of members would go on to start Journey years later. And then he did the whole band of Santana really was all different except for the key guitar player. And the sound of Santana really makes that record. But just two records of two spiritual collaborations I thought I'd show is Love, Devotion, Surrender with a Mahavishnu Orchestra. Very big fan. He was of John Coltrane, and obviously with Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin, and he would name himself Davidip Carlos Santana soon after this. In fact, here with this collaboration with Tariva, Alice Coltrane, and Davidip Carlos Santana, Illuminations, spiritual jazz rock, great guitar playing, really interesting records. I did not get these records or understand these records at the time when they came out in the early 70s, 1973 and 1974. The Santana audience didn't understand this, at least most of them. It became a whole different thing, but really cool records. Jesse Colin Young, obviously original member of the Youngbloods. Now, the Youngbloods did start on the East Coast, and they, you know, the big hit, the anthem of a generation, Get Together, love is but a song we sing, fear, fear the way we die. Come on, people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together, trying to love one another right now. Ironically, that song was written by Chet Powers, who is a synonym for Dino Valenti from Quicksilver fame. He did actually, I don't have it anymore, a record that was reissued on Capitol once he became popular again and the Youngbloods became popular. It was a song of a New York folk album, a singer-songwriter album, song of a country, I forgot the name of the album. I used to have it, gray cover, gray around, a photograph of him, a young Jesse Colin Young. But what a great tenor, what a great voice he had. I love him. Now, this is Marin County hippie stuff. Youngbloods moved to the Bay Area. They all lived up in Point Reyes, California, crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, Marin County. Beautiful, beautiful area. And he lived there, unfortunately, until his house burned down. Then he moved to Hawaii. But this record did really well. I remember this is one of the first records this is 73, and that's when I first worked at a record store. And Morning Sun, Song for Julie, Ridgetop, Old Funky Dirt, that's the line I remember. It's such a hippie Marin County West Coast album, and it's really beautiful. Does it hold up in this kind of style? Yeah. I mean, it's not what's really happening right now, this singer-songwriter. I don't think Jesse Colin Young has any kind of revitalized career, although he plays still around and he tours occasionally. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful record. It's he did a number of records after this, but this is the one that I remember the most, and this is the one I held on to, Jesse Colin Young, from the Youngbloods. Now let's talk about the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead, I think, I was trying to think about this. They're the only band of all the bands that lasted forever, at least until Jerry Garcia died, and then in the 90s. And then, of course, they lasted forever beyond that with John Mayer and Trey from Fish and very incarnations and subgenres. And they're one of the two major of the San Francisco bands that had always parallel projects going on pretty much for the duration, at least starting in the 70s. And one of the most important records, one of several, was the debut by Jerry Garcia, just called Garcia, and it has the Maslow signature of approval from 1972. That means I brought this out. It has the great green label, Warner Brothers Records. Fantastic record. And of course, this is important. Side 2 is kind of spacey, which is really cool, but it has a lot of the songs that would become huge staples in Grateful Dead music. And of course, it's got Bill Kreutzmann and Robert Hunter is part of it, who wrote the music. It's got Deal, which became a huge song for the Dead. Sugaree, of course. To Lay Me Down, The Wheel. And Robert Hunter again wrote all the lyrics. And Bob and Betty did the sounds and produced it, which was a great engineer. And Betty Canter did all this great engineering. That's why a lot of these live Dead shows sound so good. She was amazing. She went on to do sound at Grace, at Glide Memorial, a great gospel rehabilitation in a way church in San Francisco that has great Sunday gospel music shows and events and just spiritual Sunday sermons. Fantastic. This is a amazing. This is a record that everyone should have. If you like the Grateful Dead, I mean, there's people out there watching who are into the Dead more than I. I grew up with all the Dead. I've done Dead videos. I've done my rankings. I'm all in. But this is an important record. I just fell in love with this record when it came out. I played it to death. And my copy, after 50 years is out, still sounds fantastic. I don't need a backup. But I do have the reissue, so I do have a backup. When they started their own label, this was the next solo album called Garcia. I guess the other one was called Garcia, Jerry Garcia. Anyway, this is a little different, more arrangements. It's got a great version, which I really like, very sultry, acoustic version with a violin, right, of Russian Lullaby, that great, just beautiful, beautiful song on here. Cover of When the Hunter Gets Captured by the Game. Is that written by Ike Turner, I think? No, it's, Smokey Robinson. William Robinson, sorry. But 3D cover, the Boss cover, or Bossed cover. Let's Spend the Night Together. A lot of covers on here. The Rolling Stones song, Russian Lullaby, I said. Produced by John Conn, who would later do some new wave stuff and later put together the band Paul McCartney has to this day. I think that's the same John Conn, right? Let It Rock. I didn't love this record when it came out as much as the debut solo record, but it's still, I think, important in the canon of Jerry Garcia and the band. Now, the other major solo record was Ace by Bob Weir. This is a fantastic album. Of course, it has Greatest Story Ever Told, Playing in the Band, Looks Like Rain, Mexicali Blues, One More Saturday Night, Cassidy. Almost every song on this album became a staple for the Grateful Dead throughout most of the 70s. And this is a fantastic record. Cassidy, obviously about Neil Cassidy, the whole, Jack Kerouac, Neil Cassidy, On the Road, Ken Kesey, psychedelic, trippy shit. Recorded it at Wally Heider Studios, which is the place that all these people hung out and played, and all the San Francisco bands really were a family and played on everyone's albums. And the Dead and the Airplane and Santana and Neil Young would come, and David Crosby would come from Southern California and play around. And it was really a wonderful scene. Again, original 50-year-old green label copy from Warner Brothers Records. Fantastic. Then there is this one, which is interesting. Mickey Hart, one of two of the drummers of the Grateful Dead, put out this record, Rolling Thunder, and very percussive record. There's marimbas, there's drums, there's rain sequences, there's field recordings mixed in here, and there's little bits of talk about a little bit of Playing in the Band is on here, the main 10. Not as successful, but an important record in the canon as well, but not as song-based, very rhythmic, and really an interesting record. I think the better record by him and his group of percussive artists is the Digga Rhythm Band, when they started their own label again from Round Records, which was their own label. This is a gorgeous record, very wonderful metallic cover. This is from 1974, I'm thinking. Yeah, 1976. Okay, I had to read Roman numerals. Happiness and Drumming, Sweet 16 Magnificent 7, produced by Mickey Hart, recorded at the Barn in Novato, California, dedicated our friends and teacher Ustad Allah Raka, and to all the drummers everywhere. If you're a drummer, you're a fan of percussive music, percussion, this is a must for you. It's not the normal song based like those, like the Jerry Garcia or Bob Weir, but if you've followed the Dead and know drums when they do their drum bits, this is something of what you get now. Obviously, updated versions of that with Kreutzmann and Hart, Mickey Hart, Mickey Hart, Digga Digger section. Okay. Problematic, but an amazing album that became a cult album, and unfortunate, a victim of mental illness and drug use, is Skip Spence. And Skip Spence, this is his album Or, he did on Columbia, and it's become this cult favorite. This is the expanded version on Sundays. It was a single album. They go for a lot of money now, the Columbia record. I did not get it initially. I got into it years later. Skip Spence was the original drummer on the very first Jefferson Airplane album, but then he was a founding member of Moby Grape, and you know, what a great debut album, one of the best ever of the San Francisco bands. But this has become such a cult favorite, and this is the expanded version with all the overdub and outtakes and various versions. There is a album called More Ore. A lot of artists, I think from Beck to Robert Plant, cover this entire album. So it's garnished a lot of infamy in music and artists and freak folk and psychedelia, you know, more acoustic based and a bizarre record. But if you get into it, a very rewarding record now, and by this flawed, brilliant asterisk artist, Skip Spence. Or now let's go, and we're going to end up with my favorite band of the San Francisco scene, and that is the Jefferson Airplane. I'm not going to get into the Jefferson Starship band. That became a separate thing, although there is one slight exception there. And this exception is this. Another Maslov signature record from, I believe, 1972 also. This is Blows Against the Empire. It's credited to Paul Kantner, Jefferson Starship. This is not a band, Jefferson Starship album. This is Paul Kantner and friends, essentially, which is Grace Slick and David Freiberg from Quicksilver, and David Crosby, and who else is on here? Jerry Garcia, Grace Slick, Mickey Hart, Joey Covington, who was in that next incarnation of the Jefferson Airplane, Jack Cassidy, the great bass player, Graham Nash, David Freiberg, Harvey Brooks, great bass player, and so on. And this is a thematic album about leaving our planet. It was nominated for a Hugo Award, I believe. First audio recording nominated for the Science Fiction Literary Award. This is a fantastic record. I'm a big fan of this record. It's very much like what the Jefferson Airplane was heading. It could have been a Jefferson Airplane record if they had just, you know, reorganized it. Marty Balin is not on it though, but it's really it's an album. If you take the time to get into it, there's a great, you know, beautiful kind of folk song called "The Baby Tree" by Rosalie Sorrell. So that's a sort of a cover. I'm not sure she wrote it directly for this, but everything else is purely Kantner, Slick, and Crosby. Hippie, Go to Space album, fantastic, brilliant record. Of course, they follow it up with a great Slick, Paul Kantner thing called Sunfighter. I didn't love this record. It came out. It's grown on me over the years. That's their child, China, like Grace and Paul had. There's, again, a lot of the same kind of stuff produced by Paul and Grace Slick. Interesting record. It's not totally successful. Oh, this is from 1971, so I guess the other one was from 1970. I beg your pardon. But they were putting these albums out parallel to Jefferson Airplane. Unfortunately, after 1969, I think that the output, or 1970, output of the Airplane went down quality-wise. I love the Airplane, my favorite of the San Francisco bands, but their quality went down. And to all the power and all to the credit of RCA Records, they gave them this sub-label, Grunt, this parallel custom label, Grunt Records, and they put out all kinds of weird shit, literally, a lot of records. So someone really liked them at RCA back in 1970, 71, 72, 73, 74, and so on. This record had issues too. This is Paul Kantner, Grace Slick, and David Freiberg. Obviously, he joined up with them after Quicksilver sort of imploded, and also a great vocalist. And there's some, again, all these records have some interesting things. And this is Baron von Tolbooth and the Chrome Nuns. Some great writing and vocals by Grace Slick. Interesting record, not essential, but interesting stuff. And I will say, an album that I did not get, in terms of not understand when it came out, but I think there's some weird brilliance on here, and there's some orchestration, and there's some really, it's an interesting, is it a unfounded masterpiece? Probably not, but to put an album out and to call it Manhole, and it's Grace Slick, and putting this bizarre, I think self-portrait, I think she painted that, is really interesting. Produced by Grace Slick, Dave Freiberg, and Paul Kantner, the trio, the power trio of San Francisco and Marin. Interesting record. There's some cool vocals. She would do these Eastern vocals and minors and harmony and belt it out. One of my favorite vocalists of all time, female vocalists. Obviously, we know her from Airplane with White Rabbit and Somebody to Love, but really an interesting career. And she's a painter now in Southern California, totally retired from music. They made a lot. I'm not going to even jump into the whole Starship thing where they got slick and we built this city and all that crap. And, I'm not a big fan. I like maybe Dragonfly and Red Octopus when Marty Ballin came back, and that whole, it became a mess after that as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of people that prefer the Starship or the Airplane. It must be a generational thing, must be a regional thing. You're wrong, but, the first, up until Volunteers, every Jefferson Airplane album, from the first to Volunteers, is magnificent. And their live album, Bless His Pointed Little Head, is one of the great psychedelic rock 60s live albums of all time. Then I will talk about a couple more regarding the Airplane. Jack Cassidy and Yorma Konen went off and started this great parallel career, which stands to this day, in Hatuna. This is a record that was recorded in Berkeley, and it came out like this beautiful record. Folk, blues, cover stuff, really great record. This is with Yorma, Jack, and Will Scarlett on harmonica. And this is produced by Al Schmidt, great producer, and Hesitation Blues. And it's just a really good acoustic version of this band. Years later, this came out in 2018 as a Record Store Day. This is the entire show of this. So if you like this, you got to find this 2-record set. It's got the whole show, not the edited version for a single record. This is one of those flimsy Dynaflex records, which is fantastic. Sounds great. And of course, I'm just going to show one more from the Maslov collection of Hatuna electric version. And this is a really good record, too. I saw them at Winterland, and surprisingly, it was one of the loudest shows I ever saw. This is when they're electric. Papa John Creech, and who's on drums here? Oh, right, Sammy Piazza on drums. And then there's like David Crosby's on a couple songs, on some vocals. That's out on the Great Highway in San Francisco. I was not a fan when Papa John, we used to call him Screech, joined the Airplane. It added to a sound, if you hear on the live 50 Seconds Over Winterland, just got a little irritating for me. I applaud that they brought him in and he toured, but a little too much. It goes a long way. Little goes a long way of that violin with the Airplane, but it works actually better with Hatuna, in my opinion. So this is a good, cool album there. And then lastly, I'm going to close out with just an album I think is brilliant, and this is Qua. This is Yorma Konen with Tom Hobson, and this is a beautiful guitar-based album. I love this record. There was a Record Store Day version that came out. I think it was Record Store Day. This is the reissue. I do have an original, but this is 233 out of 500 copies. So if you can find a copy of Qua, it's a very rewarding, beautiful guitar record. the folk blues area. And to this day, he has Fur Peace Ranch, I believe in Ohio. He has seminars, videos, online shows. Yorma Konen, really great. I've seen him live over the years with Hatuna and solo, and he's just brilliant. So these are some records of solo and spin-offs of the San Francisco psychedelic bands of the 1960s are amongst my favorites. So glad you liked this. If you sat through it, 40 minutes, I appreciate it. Thank you again for visiting my hometown artists. But they all immigrated. Very few were from San Francisco. But I was born in the Haight-Ashbury. Mazzy loves you.